everyone. So, today's talk is called Recognizing Our Shared Humanity. And it was Gandhi who said, "We judge a society by the way it treats its most vulnerable. Often, the most vulnerable are those who arrive on our shores asking for protection." Forced migration is as old as humanity itself, and it's a natural, vital part of human history. But in today's world, where conflict and climate change has massively exacerbated that, it's worth taking in a few stats. As of May this year, there are around 43 million refugees. That's people in need of international protection. That's at a record high, by the way. It's been going up for the last 12 years. Of those 43 million people, most of them, 75%, are in poor or middle-income countries. In the UK, one of the richest countries in the world, we host just over 1%. That's not the picture that you'd get if you read some newspapers or listen to some broadcasters. You'd think it was a lot more than that. It's clear that refugees are being used by the far right to their advantage, and decades-old stereotypes are being amplified. We've been hearing in the USA, the former President Donald Trump talking about Haitians eating pets. And we may laugh at that, but it wasn't that long ago. Some of you may remember a major tabloid here in the UK talking about refugees barbecuing the Queen's swans. It's clear that we need to reshape ideas and narratives around refugees. These ideas have become so entrenched, it's difficult for almost any political party to really challenge them. We need a new story based on facts and based on a shared humanity. At Tortoise, we're all about harnessing the power of storytelling to help our listeners make sense of the world, and it's something both my guests here today have really dedicated themselves to. So I'm going to start with Gulwali. Gulwali, I have to say, reading your book, I'm a mum of a young boy who's of a similar age to the age you were when you first left Afghanistan. He has just started travelling to school by himself and is cycling around my neighbourhood, visiting his friends, and I find it very difficult and frightening letting go of the purse strings. So reading your story of how you were just 12 years old, crossing the planet, jumping from one frying pan to another, some of the most horrifyingly dangerous experiences, I just held my breath throughout the whole book. It was utterly terrifying. Can you tell us a bit about that journey?
Thank you, Chloe, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Well, this was back in 2007 or 6 when I left Afghanistan because of the conflict, because of all the situation that we were faced with the war and growing up in a war zone. I had a good childhood. I mean, I lived with my grandparents in the mountains. There was some good memories. And then sadly, the war happened in 2001. And it's strange that we sit in 2024 and things are going full cycle. That's another story for another time maybe, but anyhow. So, leaving home and being forced to flee, I was only about 12. My brother Hazrat was 13, 14, and then for our mother to send us away. At the time, I did not understood the implication, the seriousness of this, how long it will be. I thought we would be away for a few months or a few weeks or maybe a year or something. And
Your mother was told a couple of weeks that
yeah,
you'd
sure.
be in England in a few weeks.
Sure, I mean, not just that being in Europe or in England as such, but just I thought this situation would be resolved and we'll be back home. And later did I understood that it will take me over a year and I will be traveling around 10,000 miles or so and crossing many, many countries where I faced imprisonment and constant fear of being by authorities put me in prison and deported me back and forth. So, Iran, Turkey, Greece, all these countries that I went through and crossing the Mediterranean. Our boat was about to be capsized. So there's a lot of crazy experiences on the way, but I had to, and I was actually separated from my brother earlier on, so I was on my own, unaccompanied. I did meet other Afghans, made friends with them. They really helped me as a little brother, as a friend, to help me on this very challenging physical journey as well as an emotional journey. So it took over a year before I made it to the UK. But the UK wasn't really my destination as such. I would have stayed anywhere where I was welcomed or treated as a child or human being. In fact, the only place I felt treated as a child was Italy, where by then I knew my brother was in the UK, so I continued. Otherwise, I would be speaking Italiano now. And sadly, and actually, I never thought I'd write a book, and it's now published in 7 countries, in 7 languages, including Italiano and France and German and so on. But, I go to the UK, and that wasn't the end. I thought this would be the end of the journey or the experience, but after going through all the experience, a near-death experience in the Mediterranean, and being on top of lorry engine from Greece to Italy, and the smuggler treating us as a commodity, and the authority treating us as criminals
being
throughout
forced
the journey.
to stay in a chicken coop for days.
Mm-hmm.
You know, being so desperate that you decided to get into a refrigerated truck. Whether or not you survived, it was better than what you were living at that moment.
So we hear a lot about Calais. So when I go to Calais, I was warned by a lot of people about Calais, the jungle. By then I have experienced all sorts of inhumane conditions and a lot of hardships and difficulties. I thought, you know, hopefully I'll manage this. I was so close, I could see England, but yet I was so far. And that experience really shattered me, because I was there for a month until I wrote The Lightless Sky almost 9 years ago. I thought I was there for 3 months. That's how bad the conditions were. I wasn't really keeping time, what week and month and day, because there was no point to it. I did do it in the beginning, and then I realized there was no point knowing what day it was. What difference did it make? It didn't make no difference to me being in a basement, or being somewhere in the mountains for days on end, or being in the back of a chicken coop and so on. But in Calais, I once burned my face with chemicals in the back of a truck. I've tried all sorts of dangerous. The smugglers put us in some dangerous places, but ultimately, that place. The police harassments, sometimes they would tear gas us, taking away our shoes and burning our blankets and tents, walking on ends almost every night to try to go to lorry car parks. And now I know, well, a few years ago, I know that the British taxpayer pay for that treatment of refugees in northern France. It's a place that should not exist.
And that's one of the things that really surprised me about Calais and your journey, your attempts to cross there, that I think lots of people don't know is, first of all, how many failed attempts you have to do to get lucky to get across. But secondly, how many times you get in a truck or manage to get away with the truck pulling out of the depot, and then you end up in some random place, and it takes you sometimes days to walk back, and the authorities may catch you, but very deliberately don't arrest you, so you're not fed, you're not put somewhere warm and safe to sleep, but you're forced to walk back, sometimes across borders, to get back to Calais.
Correct. So when I was in Calais, the police used to arrest us for no reason, and I was quite happy about that, because I would go to the police cell, they'll give me a warm soup, I'll have some tea or coffee, and stay there for a few hours, and then I'll be walking back from the police station to the jungle. They'll arrest me again. I said, fine, you know, this was life. I was very, very frustrating, and also the lorries, once I ended up going to Belgium and once going to Germany. You get in these lorries, you have no idea where they're going. The smugglers hopes it's going to England, and yeah, I mean, this idea that France is safe, yes, France may be safe. When I go back, I was actually there 2 weeks ago. It's very safe for me now as a citizen, and if you go there with a passport, it's a different matter. If you go there on holidays, it's a different thing. But when you are on the move, when you're a refugee, when you're an asylum seeker, it's a hell of an experience being in northern France. This jungle is a jungle, and right now, as you speak, there are, you know, thousands of children, women and men, and they're stranded, especially the winter is coming. And this issue needs to be resolved. I think it's shame for Britain, it's shame for France and Europe that this place exists. We treat animals, I mean, when you go there, we treat animals better than the way that people have been treated there. And the only fate, whenever I go, the only way I'm able to come back is because I got a piece of paper, I got a document, which they don't. And that's just it's just a matter of the nationality and the passport you hold. I could be the same guy stranded in Calais right now if I didn't have a passport. And that's just wrong.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm not saying we should take everyone, that would be nice, but I'm saying we should be taking our fair share, because this idea Britain is the furthest away. We want everyone, why, if you're a genuine refugee, you should be staying in France. Well, France take 100,000 asylum applications a year. Of course, France could do more on discrimination, racism, and so on and so forth. Germany takes 700,000, 800,000 a year, or at least for asylum purposes. We have about 30,000 normally, and in recent years has risen to double that, 60 or 70,000. But you know, we need to be playing our fair share. We can't expect France, Italy, or Greece, or Spain, or other countries to take on the burden when we are unwilling. Imagine if Britain was Greece. We would be saying completely the opposite of what we are saying.
I thought the other thing that really struck me was, you know, you finally get out of the hellhole that is Calais, and you make it across to the UK, and suddenly, as a reader, I suddenly sort of exhale, he's made it, you know, and you're still a child at this point, I think 13, 14, 13. And so you land on Britain's shores, you know, somewhere here is your brother, which is what's brought you here. And then the authorities begin the process of asylum interviews or migration interviews. And at that point, they refuse to believe you're a child. And I mean, the gaslighting of this, you know, 13-year-old having traversed the globe, now being given a random birthday and told this is when you were born. It's just unbelievable.
Again, I was grateful to Britain for giving me a place to stay and giving me food and clothes, but actually they were destroying me, and they were not believing the essence of my life. So after being in Kent and Dover for a few days, and I was taken to Folkestone, to a social services offices, sitting around a table with 4, 5, 6 people, including the translator, for about 4 hours. They interviewed me, and I was giving them my date of birth, which is 11th of October. I was giving them all the information. They had my home office identification card in front of them. After 4 hours, not only did they insulted me, but they spelt my name wrong. I still have the papers with me. I'll show it to you later. They spelt my name wrong. They spelt my date of birth wrong. So instead of putting the 11th of the 10th, they put the 11th of the 11th. And they gave me a new date of birth, which was the 1st of May, 1991. They said to me, not 13, you were 16 and a half. You couldn't have traveled the world. Whatever you're telling us, that proves to us you could not be a child. And I said, well, I can't help with that. You know, I've been street smart or so. But anyway, so this whole process was very dehumanizing. And that, little did I understood, it had such an impact on my legal status and my education. It literally had so many implications for me. I threw the paper at their faces. I said, this is not who I am. In fact, they were so careless that they could have said, okay, we'll accept the 11th of October, but not the 1994, but we'll make it 1991. That could have been, negotiable, which happened actually 3 years later. They did want to negotiate with me, saying, well, we'll accept the day and the month, but not the year. It was a crazy experience, and the sad thing is, what happened to me is not unique. It's happening to almost every Afghan young person who arrives in Kent. The social services in the Home Office disputes people's age. They start with the premise you are lying. And so when your age is disbelieved, and then actually the Home Office then disputed my nationality. Not only the social services didn't believe I was 13, then Home Office didn't believe I was from Afghanistan. And then they give me a 1-year leave to remain because I was an unaccompanied minor till I'm 17 and a half. And then they threatened to deport me twice. And where they were deporting me to? Afghanistan. And I said, let's first sort out who am I, and let's sort out my age, and then we'll discuss my nationality, and then you can deport me. I said, for the purpose of deportation, I'm Afghan, but for the purpose of protection, I'm not Afghan. This whole thing was really bizarre. And so it took me a long time before I was able to challenge it with the help of lots of people, teachers, youth workers, supporters. And the thing that upsets me is that what has happened to me is happening to so many people. Almost half of young people in Kent are age disputed.
Really shocking. And Jazz, you had a very, very different childhood growing up in London, but events took you to the jungle in Calais too, for very different reasons. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, definitely. I love listening to your story again. It reminds me of when I was reading your book, and there was a bit at the beginning where Gulwali describes life in Afghanistan, and I remembered that your grandma was a midwife, which made me feel better, because if I spontaneously go into labour, then Gulwali knows what to do, because you'd go with her and have to listen in the other room when you were little. I remember that vision of young Gulwali. But yeah, absolutely. So I also had a very different journey that took me to Calais. And so many of the things that Gulwali talks about are very close to home to me in a different way. I have an Afghan foster brother. I grew up in Kent. And he had his age disputed, his story disputed, his asylum denied, even though he'd lived with my family for years. He'd been going to college, he'd been studying. But anyway, I'll start a little bit more from the beginning and introduce myself. So I'm a podcaster and a writer focusing on migration and displacement. And this journey started for me in 2015, so nearly 10 years ago. And that's sad to recognize, because the rhetoric and the narrative around migration has not changed that much. It certainly hasn't got better in the last 10 years. Guys, I'm so pregnant, this is why I'm out of breath.
Take it slow.
I need to talk slower. So, 2015, if you guys can cast your mind back to the kind of rhetoric that we were hearing, swarms of migrants coming from the Calais jungle. It was the same year that my youngest biological brother was turning 18. And the reason I'm telling you this is because it all makes sense in the end. But my mum and dad in Kent were having a classic case of empty nest syndrome. And they had always had a big family at home. I'm the oldest of 4. And when my youngest brother was kind of looking at options to move out, they realized that this kind of big dinner table experience of people coming and going in our house was going to change. ironically, it's busier than ever right now because they started looking into their options for fostering or adoption. And what they came to learn was that there were many unaccompanied minors, or I say many, actually not that many in terms of globally, but there was a need for foster parents for young children like Gulwali who were arriving to the shores of Kent, Dover and Folkestone. And they needed families, that a lot of them had come without their families, that had lost families along the way, and that they were alone from the age of the youngest unaccompanied minor I ever met was 7. So my mum and dad started looking into this option, and it took them 9 months to become registered foster parents. And in that time, little did they know that on the other side of the world, there was a boy making his own 9-month journey, and his name is Mez, and he became my first foster brother. He's from Eritrea. He, similarly to Gulwali, crossed the Mediterranean, crossed the Sahara Desert, lived in the Calais jungle until he hid underneath the Eurotunnel train to make it to the UK when he was 12. He was fleeing compulsory military service in Eritrea. And him joining my family when he was 12 and 10 years ago now changed the course of all of our lives in my family. It opened our eyes to the journeys that people like Gulwali and Mez are taking, and that they are not unique. And not just that, then the asylum system that he had to navigate. So even though he had a family, he had a home in the UK, he had support, he had a network, he started going to school, he went on to do his GCSEs and learn English, and he still had to navigate his immigration status, which has been something that's been hanging over his head for the last 10 years still. He just got his British citizenship recently, and I think it took you 15 years. And I think this is something that a lot of people, maybe including me, didn't realise, that in arriving to the UK, that is definitely not the end of the story and not the end of the journey. So anyway, I could talk about this for a long time, but he's the first of 4 foster brothers that I have from Eritrea, Sudan, Libya, and Afghanistan. And it was Gulwali's book that actually we passed around my whole family. We've got a copy right here. That really changed the way that we understood my Afghan brother's experience when he first arrived, when he didn't speak English, and we needed that insight into the journey that he might have taken. It was your story that gave us that, and it was a very helpful and a very beautiful, powerful story.
And I just wanted to say that after being granted asylum, your foster brothers had the right to remain in the UK for 5 years. And at the end of those 5 years, they had to reappear and have another migration interview where they did the entire process again, even though your family was standing there saying, these are our children, we are financing them, looking after them, responsible for them in every way. They are in no way a cost or a burden to the state. It made no difference.
Absolutely, and I can tell you guys another little story that highlights this. So Mez, my first foster brother, he went on, as I said, to learn English, to do his GCSEs, to open a shop with my other foster brother, my Sudanese brother, an international food centre in our local town, and a halal butcher's, and they're doing really well. They're in their 20s now, which is crazy. And a couple of years ago, Mez had an experience that highlights what you're describing, where his younger brother also left Eritrea for the same reason that he had left, compulsory military service. And Mez was very scared of his younger brother having to experience this same thing, because the journey that Mez took has only got more difficult. So Mez had always encouraged him not to leave Eritrea, but his brother, like him, I think had hope for a future beyond their experience in Eritrea. So he left Jossie, Mez's brother, who was a couple of years younger than Mez, looks exactly like him, and he crossed the Sahara Desert, and he attempted to cross the Mediterranean Sea. And he attempted 5 times, and each time he was caught by the Libyan Coast Guards, brought back to Libya, thrown into prison, smuggler prison, where he was held at ransom until Mez paid the money to release him. But still, in Libya, he had a very difficult existence. It's a very dangerous place to be as someone who's not Libyan. So Mez tried everything that he could to find a way to get Jossie here legally. And when we do hear this rhetoric of people should take legal routes, well, let me tell you that there were no legal routes available to Jossie to get to the UK, even though he had a family waiting for him. He had a bed ready for him in Mez's room. We signed documents to say in this case that we built with a lawyer that he would never take anything from the state, that he could work in Mez's shop, that he had everything ready for him. Mez was like, I'll provide everything for my brother, whatever he needs. So we fought for 2 years, and Jossie was in a situation where no one had ever left Libya over the age of 18, even though he had a brother in the UK, even though they had DNA tests and everything. We had a very good immigration lawyer. And after 2 years, he was the first over 18-year-old Eritrean who was flown out on a UNHCR plane to Romania and successfully resettled to the UK, the first. And he joined our family last summer. He's learning English, he's going to college, and they were reunited after 10 years of not seeing each other, which was one of the most amazing moments ever for all of us. But especially when you saw Mez and Jossie, who were identical at the airport together. But it seems so crazy to me that he had to go through years of, it was almost too late. You know, it was almost to the point where the experience that he'd had to go through impacted him so much mentally, emotionally, physically, that if he was going to be able to come here anyway eventually, why put young people through that? And Gulwali's story is another really good example.
And we talk about legal routes, illegal routes. We were talking backstage about how those terms are quite unhelpful. But I mean, Gulwali, your mother had absolutely nowhere to apply to say, my young children are in serious danger. I need to get them out of here to protect their lives. She had no recourse to anything. She couldn't, she wasn't a Ukrainian parent who could approach the British government and ask for asylum. There was no way for her to get you guys to safety beyond paying smugglers.
I mean, to be fair, Britain and America was the reason I was forced to flee and losing loved ones. But, 175,000 Afghans have lost their lives. If they were going to hand over Afghanistan to the Taliban, they could have done it earlier on. But, this point about legal and illegal. So in international law, everyone have a right to claim asylum, particularly those states who have signed up to the 1951 Geneva Convention. No matter how you arrive, you should not be penalized for the manner of your entry. There is no regular route. There is no way for my family or for whomever in Afghanistan or elsewhere in the world where they can apply for asylum visa or for humanitarian visa. That's not available. The law in the UK is, if you go on the government website, it says you have to be on British soil to claim asylum. But then there is no way getting here through regular routes. So, I mean, I don't like the idea of legal or safer routes, because when you say legal, there's also then illegal. Then illegal is quite a dehumanizing term. And again, we have laws in the UK now which says coming here irregularly is illegal, but that is basically breaking international law. The international law says it's not illegal. And this idea, as I was saying earlier, states, because they're furthest away, they could say, look, we had an example because Britain was threatening to send people to Rwanda. Then a lot of people went to Ireland, and the British government said, look, it works, people are going to Ireland. The Irish could say the same thing, like, Britain is a safe country, why are you coming to Ireland? What you should be staying there. So I feel like, my mom had no way up, and not only not knowing, but there is no way to actually seek visas for asylum. And when a lot of Afghans apply for student visas or visitor visas, they usually get refused because the British government knows if these people get here through safer routes, through regular routes, they will be eligible for asylum because of the conditions of Afghanistan in the country. There was a ruling yesterday, actually, a very good ruling by the European, some courts or somewhere, something which said that any Afghan woman who gets to Europe will be entitled to asylum, which is really, really good because of the whole women apartheid, the situation is happening, the gender apartheid that's happening in Afghanistan. So, it's a strange situation where we didn't have a choice. And if I have a choice, I want to be with my loved ones. I mean, the government is now using these terms, legal and illegal, illegal and safer routes, but actually, there's a resettlement scheme for Afghans. Britain should be taking 5,000 Afghans a year. The first year, they only took 22. the second year, I think 2000 or something came, and you can't even apply for that. It's a lottery system, you had to be selected. Right now, we have around 20,000 Afghans stuck in Pakistan, actually with visas. But the British government is telling them that we can't bring you to Britain because we don't have housing for you. And it's crazy, we're in a strange situation where we don't want people to come in through irregular means, but then when they do come, try to come through regular means, that's just not available, or sometimes it takes years and years for them to take. So I just
or there are different options for different nationalities,
sure.
Right? We have a very two-tier system where there are options if you're Ukrainian or from Hong Kong.
Which is good, which we support.
Which absolutely, it shows that we can do it and that there are ways and means. But when it comes to Eritreans, Afghans, Sudanese, there is very minimal, if any, options to claiming asylum in the UK.
And also, when the government does take the reins, like with the Ukrainian situation, where they were big signs in Heathrow Airport saying, welcome Ukrainians, and there was a scheme opened up to the public stepped up to it. And so many people in Britain came forward and helped Ukrainian refugees, housed them, took care of them. And that kind of top-down attitude would make a very big difference, but it's not happening right now, and it seems very difficult for almost any political party to really step up and try and challenge the narratives that have become so embedded. It feels that it's very difficult for anyone to win an election in the UK right now without being tough on immigration and asylum. You guys have both been trying to challenge the narratives around that. How successful have you been with asylum speakers that you're both involved with? That's the sort of aim of your organisation. Can you talk a bit about how you've been doing that and the impact?
Yeah, of course. So the bit that I didn't tell you guys is that after Mez joined my family, I went to Calais to try and find out a little bit more about, actually it was just before he came. It was when my mum and dad were going through the process, and I had a lot of questions about, okay, what I'm reading in the media doesn't seem to make sense or answer some of the questions about the people there. And that began a wave of, this is kind of how we first connected, of collecting donations using social media to support how we could in Calais. And as you say, the British public were very, very open to that. The way that people responded was incredible in Calais, that we had distribution days and drop-off days of donations in the UK, and then we brought them to Calais, and it was a really wild time, and it was more about physical donations at the time because it was a very emergency response in Calais where people needed warm clothes and tents and sleeping bags. But I think what soon became apparent, or what I soon realised, is that however many tents or sleeping bags that you distribute in Calais, that camp shouldn't exist in the first place. No one should be living in those situations, and unfortunately the situation in Calais is worse than ever. It hasn't changed since Gulwali was there, which is crazy to say. So how do we get to the root of this problem? How do we challenge that rhetoric and that misinformation around migration in the UK? And I do believe that that is an education piece that needs to happen. And how do we get to people's hearts and minds? And for me, that was definitely through meeting people with this experience, that many of the opinions formed around refugees and asylum seekers are often formed having never met somebody with that background. So at Asylum Speakers, our goal is for every person in the UK to have heard firsthand from somebody who has lived experience of displacement. And we do that in lots of different ways. We give talks in schools and universities, but also we have some books and a podcast and lots of different ways that we try and get this message and these stories out there. Gulwali is the best salesman.
I try.
And this last year, this is a good example actually, Bobble is a picture book, and I say picture book instead of a children's book because I feel like everyone can learn from his experience. But Bobble is based on Gulwali's story, and he was born this time last year from a place of helplessness, which I imagine that a lot of us have felt this last year, seeing a genocide unfold in the palms of our hands on social media before our eyes and not really knowing what to do about it. So Bobble was a response to that, a story of displacement. He represents all of those with lived experience of displacement. And we had a Kickstarter campaign to try and raise the money to publish him, in the hope that we could encourage some very basic empathy, compassion for people who were experiencing this from a young age, and open up the conversation about migration in an easier way for children, but for adults alike, I think.
And Gulwali, I know that you've written an entire book describing your journey and your experience and your emotional journey, which I know hasn't been easy for you, because it's not something that comes naturally, it's not something that was in your culture as a child. And beyond that, it was something that, caused you immense mental health trauma. It took a very long time for you to get over. And the fact that you were able to open yourself up to that has been quite challenging.
Sure. I mean, if I had a choice, I wouldn't have to have made the journey. And then to make the journey, a lot of my friends just want to live their lives, don't want people to know they're asylum seekers or they were refugees. They just think it was a part of our journey and experiences. What happened was normal, and I thought it wasn't. So when I got the opportunity, it was a big deal to actually write this book and then to go through the experience, which there are stories and things that I wanted to forget, not to relive it. And then my friend Nadine, who helped me write the book, she said to me, I would be like, eating my nails and cracking my fingers. She's like, no, you need to focus, this is important. I said, well, I'm not very keen on telling you this story. But anyway, so we wrote it in hope to inform people, to educate them, to inspire them, to empower them to take actions. This was 2015 at the peak of so-called refugee crisis in Europe. Although the refugee crisis has been happening for years, there are about 8 million Afghans actually left Afghanistan in the last 3 years alone. We had about 5-6 million Afghans been hosted by Iran and Pakistan for the last 30 or 40 years, although there's very little opportunities of education, employment and rights and citizenship and so on. So for me, I've traveled across Britain. I've done like maybe 600-700 talks and like 1,000 interviews. So it's really given me a platform. I was at like 30 countries or so, which I never thought I'd be using my negative experience for something positive. So I realized that this burden, this responsibility on my shoulder, it's not easy. And sometimes we were discussing like lived experiences, getting refugees to share their story and get people to connect on a human level. Although I agree, but at the same time, it shouldn't be the job of refugees to actually get people to show empathy, to get people to show compassion, to get people to show solidarity. Like I'm a father of 2 little kids, and what I'm seeing in Gaza for the last year or so, I was just discussing with you earlier, like what is the point of anything when I'm seeing a televised live genocide and ethnic cleansing and war crimes, and what's happening in Lebanon, where Lebanon has been hosting 1 in 5 people in Lebanon were Syrian refugees, and now the table has turned. Literally millions Lebanese and former Syrian refugees have left back for Syria. It's crazy the world that we're living in. And so, I mean, it's depressing, it's frustrating, but at the same time, we do what we can to trying to make sense of things and trying to make the world a better place. So that's why we're here speaking to you, and hope that, we do our little part. So we're not just staying silent, we're making our voices heard, and it's tough, it's challenging to see, like, and then again, like in the UK, we don't like, there's some people who don't like refugees or the government or in the West, but then we are selling weapons to Israel, we are not stopping the war in Lebanon, and we're just like, the whole situation with Iran. If there was a war broke out with Iran, there would be millions and millions of refugees, and then they would not even be welcome here. So I think we had to use preventative measures, we have to use diplomacy, we have to use political will. There is ways of dealing with the situation, and I think there isn't the political will in Britain, in the Western world, to deal with this, the war in Gaza, or in the situation in Palestine went on for 75 years, and also the situation in Afghanistan. Like 3 years on, like Afghans have no food, have no jobs, literally the whole economy has collapsed, and the West was just happy to get out, and they went and spent trillions and trillions. Like almost 200,000 people lost their lives, and we are back to square one. The Taliban are more powerful than they were in 2001. They have the latest US weapons. We're in a strange world where the US were dealing and making agreements with the Taliban in Doha in 2020. There were people like me who were protesting, and no one listened. And now we're at a stage where literally Afghan girls are not allowed to go to school, Afghans are women not allowed to get out of the house. Now they had a decree recently that the women's voice is also forbidden in public. It's crazy what's happening there. And the West, the British government last week closed the Afghan embassy in London because the Taliban have fired a few staff members from there, and the British, because the Taliban have fired staff members, therefore we're going to close the embassy. There are literally thousands of Afghans who need services from the British embassy, and the British government is in a strange move. Like, sometimes when I think about these things, it just, I wish I didn't knew these things, it's very upsetting. Like, what are we heading? The US, the UK doesn't recognize the Taliban. Fair enough, that's a good point. But then why are we closing embassies because they fire some former Republic staff? Like that's nothing to do with the British government. Like, the British government should not be closing the Afghan embassy.
But Gulwali, tell me about when you've spoken to people about your journey in the UK.
Sorry, I'm going to a
you've
different tangent.
You've gone on to politics,
Getting
but
passionate.
coming back to the narrative, which is what I'm really interested in, because it seems like such an important but almost intractable problem. Both of you, in fact, can you describe a moment where you feel like you've got through to somebody, that you've seen that change, you see the sort of light in their eyes as they suddenly change their minds and the way that they think? Have you had moments like that?
Something come to mind. I was speaking at a school, not from Jacob Rees-Mogg constituency, I think somewhere in Terraverton Parkway. This was a while back, 2016, 17, and I spoke to the year 9 or year 10's geography class. And then at the end, one boy came up to me and he said, look, I'm ashamed of telling you, I'm about to tell you something that I'm ashamed of, but please, hear me out. And he says, I was afraid of people like you. And that's what my parents, or that's what I heard in the news, that people like you were a threat, a danger to us. And this is the first time he said to me, I'm meeting an Afghan, I'm meeting somebody who's Muslim. He heard, I was there like for an hour and a half or so, and to hear my story. And I actually hugged the boy and I said, that's very brave of you to actually say that. And he said, what I heard completely challenged my understanding of what was happening in the world and who people like you, I should not be afraid of, and how the media and like my own family had made me feel afraid of people like you. So there's been so many occasions like that, and I feel like, traveling across Britain, people are compassionate, people are kind, people are generous, but sometimes the good people are not the ones writing in on social media. The good people are not the one. I sit on fostering panels, quite a few of them in Northamptonshire as well as in Manchester. There's wonderful people like Jazz's parents coming forward and fostering children, fostering unaccompanied minors, fostering just any children. There's so much good works happening which we don't hear about. We only hear about the negative things. So through our stories, people wrote to me from all over the world, from New Zealand, from Sri Lanka, to Brazil, to Uruguay, to the US, to Canada, to everywhere, like India. And it's amazing, people read it, not just to understand the refugee experience, but to understand friendship, to understand the importance of all sorts of other things that come through the book, and the importance of empathy and so on. So I feel like, stories are powerful, and I think everyone have a story, and we should be willing to listen.
Thank you. I just want to open it up if anyone has any questions in the audience. Here at the front, has anyone got a mic? Oh, it's coming. Okay.
Hello, thanks to all of you, really interesting. I've done a lot of work with refugees. I've been over to Calais recently. It's even worse in Dunkirk. Dunkirk is absolutely awful. The worst thing is the French authorities, as you say, absolutely disgusting. I just wanted to make a couple of comments, which is basically they will, within probably once or twice a month, they will crash the tents, destroy the tents. What we're doing over here, I work with some charities, and what we're doing is we're going to festivals, salvaging the tents, taking them over, which is great, but it ends up, instead of landfill here, it's ending up landfill there. It's just inhumane. All I would say, if anybody is interested in getting lived experience, first experience, go and work over there. Go and spend some time volunteering at RCK, Refugee Community Kitchen, MRS, Mobile Refugee Support. If you've got teenagers, people that are taking a gap year, please do. I did an OAP gap time, I'm in my 60s, and I've got time to do it. Do it. You've got one life, live it. You will meet these people like lovely Gulwali here. You will see real people. They're not migrants, they're people. The awful rhetoric spouted by the right-wing press just puts them down, as you say, like the incident you had in the school. People were scared. No, that's just rubbish. We're all human, we're all born looking up at the same sky and the same stars. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for the work that you've been doing.
You mentioned that there was much more support for the Ukrainian and the people from Hong Kong coming over. And I think that's probably in part because the media, government is always telling us their culture, their values, their backgrounds are much more similar to ours. This is, I guess, a two-part question. What was your experience with the differences in culture and values, and does it matter? And how do we change that rhetoric to make people understand that actually it doesn't, and it really is just about the humanity and the people behind it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can both speak to that. It's a really good question. And in my own family, that long table that I was describing now has a lot of different cultures and insight coming to it at dinner time. And I really feel like that's been the most enriching thing that we could have asked for, and that when we travel, when we go outside of the UK, that's what we're looking for, that's what we enjoy, and that in a city like London, that's what we benefit from gastronomically and economically and culturally and musically. I really feel, and this is something that in our work we are looking to do, is that migration needs a PR shift, that we really do need to rework the idea that people coming here we have so much to gain from that. And I'm not in the business of kind of changing people's minds, and in answer to your previous question about kind of actively seeing people's minds being changed, but I hope that in some of the stories that we tell, we can give an example of how it can be a really beautiful thing. Like every time I come and meet any of your family members, I benefit greatly from a lot of Afghan food, always. And yeah, maybe you've got some more examples to talk.
Sure. Thank you, sir, for the work that you do in Calais. And I think if people went there, there's a really good film called On Our Doorsteps. It's brilliant. It shows that what's happening there, just literally on our doorstep, and how we are either not aware of, we don't want to be aware of. And it's great to see a lot of young people actually going and volunteering. And I encourage people to go and see it here, as well as in Greece, in Bosnia, in Serbia, and so on and so forth. But the question about culture, recently the Tory party leadership candidate has been making comments about not all cultures are equal and so on and so forth. But I don't want to get into that. But I just think there's nothing wrong with having different cultures. We're sitting here, we have different values, different cultures, some similar values, some different values of different cultures. That's all cool. I think the way we look at things and the way we see it, I think for me, I had to unlearn a lot of things about my own culture and the things that was not kind of okay-ish, or there's still things that I hold on to. And it was, people say integration. I mean, I don't like, of course, assimilation is wrong, but integration is also problematic for me. But I think it's more of a transformation experience. If you welcome people, if you treat them well and with dignity and with compassion, they will become really useful and good citizens. I'm not saying if you treat people badly, they should become bad citizens, but it will have an impact on their mental health and well-being and so on. So I feel like we need to really move away from, and also we are having this discussion about, the contribution that refugees make. And then when you go on Twitter, people say, all these doctors and nurses, they're coming over. Look, all the people who are invading us, they're going to be great for us. But actually, I have so many friends who are scientists, who are doctors, and who are engineers. But for me, I don't want to convince people through that argument of refugees and migrants contribute. They contribute anyway, because if they want to belong here, they want to make their home here, they will contribute. But ultimately, it's the right thing to do, that we welcome people. And again, we owe it to people. Afghanistan and Afghans were abandoned and betrayed by the West, particularly Britain. Now, the situation with Gaza and Lebanon and in Sudan, and the situation in South Sudan and elsewhere in the world, we have a moral obligation, we have a legal obligation also. In some part of the world, we owe it to people, whether we like it or not.
Thank you very much to both of you, Jazz O'Hara and Gulwali Passarlay. And just to remind everyone that their books are over there if you want to have a look and chat to them afterwards. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.